Good morning, grand rising. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is Wake Up Investigates, our Friday look, deep dive into matters of public interest. And today we're going to be looking at a media savvy family whose proverbial does not stink according to the media. Well, not according to this media person. My name is Sonia Poulton. I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and you can expect the unexpected over the next hour or so. Yes, absolutely you can. Welcome to the show that knows you can live a life of great splendor. Your love life and family can, according to all appearances, be perfect. You can enjoy great privilege, homes around the world, famous friends, and you can still be devoid of any real joy or meaning in your life. Which brings me to today's show, The Dark Side of the Beckhams. And I want to first of all say thank you all for being here. Grand rising to you, Sid. And lovely to have you with us. I saw the first comment this morning was from Lorraine. I think is it Larian or Lorraine? Oh, I'm really looking forward to this. They have rang alarm bells for years. Expose away, Sonia. I will do your bidding. Absolutely, I will. Thank you for being here. Wherever you're watching us, whether you're watching us on Spotify, on YouTube, or Rumble, we are no longer streaming on X, but thank you for being here. So let's get cracking. Let's do it, people. Let's get cracking. The dark side of the Beckhams. Well, global media is currently distracting people with gossip about the Beckhams' relationship. But at Wake Up, we go behind the public persona and determine whether this is a story that really matters or not, or is it just media gossip? And yes, it does matter, which is why I've been highlighting the Beckhams and their globalist antics for years. The Beckhams are not fluffy celebrities, but propagandists who contribute negatively to society. Despite appearances to the contrary, the story of David and Victoria Beckham is not a celebrity story. It's about the pair of them being fame-hungry, ruthlessly ambitious, malleable individuals who have been harnessed against us for a series of diabolical agendas. David and Victoria Beckham did that thing, sold their souls to the devil, for want of a better description. This is no exaggeration, as you will see over, as I say, the next hour or so. This week, the Beckhams have been all over the press, and their private world has exploded into the public domain. Their eldest son, Brooklyn, decided to compose a 6-page letter about the problems with his family. Media has gone wild, as you might expect. The speculations about the fractured relationships between the Beckhams, their son, and his wife now seemingly confirmed. This tale of celebrity gossip is not a story I would normally cover, and I'm not going to get too much into talking about the Beckhams and their relationships with their children and their children's partners, other than to acknowledge Brooklyn's comments that they had a ring of truth about them. I also acknowledge that family relationships can be difficult, especially in the spotlight, but this is the monster the Beckhams invited into their lives because they have sold every available access to themselves and their children. They did this. Now they're discovering they can't always control the narrative, despite the fact they've been able to do that since the 90s. However, the reason this story concerns Wake Up viewers is this. Over the years, I have talked about the dark side of David Beckham and how he's not the national treasure we've been sold. And due to requests to cover this story, I decided to do an expose, which looks at why the Beckhams are one of the greatest tools of the British establishment and of globalists. But first, a little history. David Robert Joseph Beckham was born on the 2nd of May, 1975 at Whipps Cross University Hospital in Leytonstone, London, England. Beckham's maternal grandfather's maternal grandmother, it was Elizabeth Lazarus Llewellyn. She was Jewish. Beckham has referred to himself as half Jewish and wrote in his autobiography, "I probably had more contact with Judaism than with any other religion." Victoria Caroline Adams, aka Posh Spice, was born on the 17th of April 1974 at the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow, Essex, England, and raised in Goffs Oak, Hertfordshire. She is said to be a practicing Catholic. The couple's got married in an Anglican church back in 1999, and they've since had all their children christened. So their relationship with religion isn't actually that straightforward. And David's relationship with religion appears to change depending on who he is speaking to. He's Jewish when he's talking to a Jewish publication, but when he's talking to a glossy magazine like Esquire, he says things like this: people look at my tattoos and the majority of them are religious images. So people think, oh, he must be very religious. I respect all religions, he said, but I'm not a deeply religious person. I try to live life in a right way, respecting other people. I wasn't brought up in a religious way, but I believe there's something out there that looks after you, which is really odd because he actually told a Jewish publication that his family observed Jewish times, such as the Sabbath, and he wore a kippah. But this tells us a great deal about the chameleon that is David Beckham. He can be whatever you want him to be for a price, and his wife is no different. So, let's talk a little bit, first of all, about how we came to know the Beckhams. Well, obviously, Victoria was in the Spice Girls. He was a footballer. He fell out of popularity in the UK when he revealed his petulance at a World Cup. England was against Argentina. The captain apparently shoved Beckham to the ground, and Beckham then lifted up his foot and kind of kicked him from the back. And Beckham was then sent off when England went on to lose the match on penalties. And David Beckham, for a period of time, became such an a villain in the UK. There were images of him kind of hanging from pubs. It was absolutely insane. But this is where Victoria comes in. Victoria was definitely the most famous one at this point. As I say, she was in the Spice Girls. Now, I had an experience, a personal experience with Victoria. There is a video on YouTube about it, so I'm not going to go into any great depth about it. It's been covered in this book by Sunday Times best-selling author Sean Smith. And I was essentially drafted in by Virgin Records press officer. And she said that Virgin didn't know what to do with their new signing. It was 5 girls. It was at a time when boy bands were all the rage, right? Take That, Westlife, etc., etc. And Virgin didn't know what to do with them. They were this kind of rag bag of 5 young females who are all different. And actually, I saw that immediately as their strength. And I'm just going to read you the intro to this. And it goes, Virgin were trying to get more media coverage for the girls. Then the head of press asked music journalist Sonia Poulton to interview them at a recording studio in West London. Sonia had been told by her friend, people don't get them. They think pop bands need to be all synchronized and dressed in matching outfits. Nobody in the press is interested. Sonia could immediately see how different they were. Victoria, for instance, was wearing a pencil skirt and a smartly tailored jacket, while Jerry was dressed in what appeared to be a teal green piece of Bako foil. And it goes on, Sonia set about trying to identify them as individuals. Her conversation with the girls is fascinating. Mel B, she decided, was feisty and strong with lots of attitude. She told Jerry, you're a vamp. Seaside saucy meets exotic dancer. She thought blonde Emma was cute and needed protection. I see you as the baby doll of the group, she said. Melanie C was easy. Obviously, you're the sporty one. Finally, she turned to Victoria, the least talkative of them, and she said, you are the sophisticated one. You have a snobbish quality about you. So these were the rough ideas that I kind of nailed out and or hammered out rather when I met them at a recording studio in 1996. It was about 4 months before they released Wannabe, and I gave all that information to the Virgin press officer. I sketched out the details over lunch that day, and the next thing I know, the official story is that they were named by Top of the Pops, and that's not true. I absolutely hammered out their individual personalities. Now, this was not something I just created out of thin air. They were in front of me looking like this. Emma looked like the baby doll. And Melanie C was clearly very sporty. I mean, she offered to do a backflip there and then for me. But what I noticed immediately was that there were 3 kind of talented females and 2 not talented at all. And the 2 not talented at all in regards to music was Jerry and Victoria. And they sang a number of live songs to me, including Wannabe and Two Becomes One. And I was really there to kind of interview them and get them ready. But as I say, I hammered out their personas. And what I noticed about Victoria was that I realized this was I think she was chosen because she was pretty. She was a pretty female. She couldn't dance. She couldn't sing. She was wooden as anything. And she was very, very self-conscious. She had acne scars and she kept pulling her hair forward to cover her cheeks. And there were different things that I noted about them, which actually now reflecting back on it, it's so easy to see how they became essentially a media invention. And one of them was Victoria and Mel B and Jerry were all smokers, but they said to me, do you mind if we smoke? But don't tell anybody, we're not allowed to smoke. And it was all that kind of stuff, right? Now, the Spice Girls, they made an absolute killing for Virgin and for themselves. They made hundreds of millions through record sales, tours, massive merchandising. They had earnings peaking around 60 million annually at their height. They had global revenue estimated at around $500 to $800 million by 1998. They were huge. They were huge. The 2008 reunion tour alone grossed $70 million, with each member earning millions. So yes, they were absolutely massive, no doubt about it. But to be clear, the success of the Spice Girls wasn't so much about musical talent, but about fantastic marketing. That is the reality. Fantastic marketing, of which I played a part and was never credited. And the reason they couldn't credit me and didn't want to credit me was they wanted it to be seen that these names, Posh, Sporty, etc., had come only from Top of the Pops magazine, because they didn't want it to be seen that the ideas had come from in-house effectively, because that would have told people that this was a media invention. So there you go. That is the true story of the beginning of the Spice Girls. So, and I don't claim to have done anything beyond what I did. And that was as I say, I hammered out their personas, which were already there for me to see. So this pair, David and Victoria, she was Victoria Adams at the time. They met in 1997 at a charity football match. Victoria was attending it. David was playing for Manchester United. And they married on July the 4th, 1999 in Dublin, Ireland. The wedding remains actually, frankly, one of the most kind of like iconic celebrity events of the 1990s. It was estimated to have cost approximately $500,000 to $750,000 at the time. And they were infamously remembered for sitting on thrones. And they kind of like were given this affectionate name by the press. And again, a real insight into the fact that these two have garnered much favor from the press over the years. And they were given this kind of name as Posh and Becks, and their home was said to be called Beckingham Palace. That's what the press called it. And media has largely told the world to be nice about David Beckham and Victoria Adams. That is the reality. They've had a great ride really up until this week. Really, they have. And it also should be noted that right from then, they were already using their first child, Brooklyn Beckham, who dropped the bomb on them this week, in their wedding photos, which they sold to OK Magazine, and pornographer Richard Desmond. More about him shortly. So they went on to have a phenomenally successful business empire between the pair of them, known as Brand Beckham. They have 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl. And you can see them here. There they are. And which brings me to this week and what Brooklyn did. So Brooklyn Beckham, the eldest of the 4 children, launched a missile at his famous family via the celebrity's favorite social media website, Instagram. It was a 6-page document where he proceeded to tell tales on his famous family based on why he is estranged from them and why he does not want to reconcile. 3 years ago, Brooklyn married into the Jewish American billionaire empire, the Peltz family, and his relationship with his own famous family has been subject to much gossip and speculation ever since. Brand Beckham, a carefully crafted and expensively maintained image, shattered this week, and not before time. To those of us who know better, it has long been deserved to shatter into a multitude of pieces. And it took their eldest son, Brooklyn, to do it. In his missive, he set out how he had tried to keep these matters private, but his parents and their team had continued to go to the press behind his back. So I'm going to read you some excerpts about it, which I think are relevant, but I'm not going to go into kind of like all the details. You can see it's all online. I'm not going to go into all the details about their relationships because some of it's a bit he said, she said, but some of it really rings true. So let me just work through this. He said, I've been silent for years and made every effort to keep these matters private. Unfortunately, my parents and their team have continued to go to the press, leaving me with no choice but to speak for myself and tell the truth about only some of the lies that have been printed. So first off, straight off the bat, when things were falling apart between the Beckhams and their son after he'd married Nicola Peltz, what he's saying is, you know, they continued to use the press against him. I believe them. I think they are so ruthless. They would absolutely brief the press against their child if it looked like he was going to damage their empire. And he goes on to say, I do not want to reconcile with my family. I'm not being controlled. I'm standing up for myself for the first time in my life. For my entire life, my parents have controlled narratives in the press about our family. The performative social media posts, family events, and inauthentic relationships have been a fixture of the life I was born into. And that's true. Absolutely. As you can see, as I just showed you, straight off the bat, the poor child had no choice. And in fact, they actually sold when Victoria was pregnant. So this child was commodified from when he was in the womb, right? This is a fact. That's the life he grew into. And whatever people think of the Beckham children, this is the way they have been raised. And he said, he goes on to talk about how his parents have been endlessly trying to ruin his relationship with his wife since before his wedding. And he talks about how they had tried to pressurize him and attempted to bribe him into signing away the rights to his name, which would have affected him, his wife, and our future children. They were adamant on me signing before my wedding date because then the terms of the deal would be initiated. My holdout affected the payday and they have never treated me the same since. So that's kind of what he's saying it's based on, is that they essentially wanted him to sign away to do with his trademark, which runs out this year. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But some of the other stuff, which actually is really uncomfortable and what many people have been talking about for a long time behind the scenes. He then talks about how his mum hijacked his first dance with his wife, which has actually been disputed. And it turned out it was probably the second dance. But what happened was Mark Anthony, formerly married to Jennifer Lopez, singer, was on stage and he called Brooklyn to the stage where in the schedule it was planned that he would do this romantic dance with his wife. But instead, his mum, Victoria, was waiting to dance with him instead. And he goes on to say, she danced very inappropriately on me in front of everyone. I've never felt more uncomfortable or humiliated in my entire life. And he goes on to explain that the reason that they renewed their vows so soon after their first wedding was because due to his parents and in particular his mother, whose ire is largely directed at his mother. But he says that his wedding day, his original wedding day, was not about joy and happiness. It was filled with anxiety and embarrassment because of the behavior of his, in particular, his mother. And he goes on to say, again, my family value public promotion and endorsements above all else. Brand Beckham comes first. Family love, in quotes, is decided by how much you post on social media or how quickly you drop everything to show up and pose for a family photo op, even if it's at the expense of our professional obligations. And then he just goes on to say that they've gone out of their way over the years to always support the Beckhams in what they do. And he was really angry because his wife had asked his mum's support to save displaced dogs during the LA fires, and his mum refused. And he just goes on to say that I wake up every morning grateful. I'm not being controlled by my wife. And I think this is really interesting. The whole thing is really interesting because what a body blow for any family, especially a tightly controlled media empire like Brand Beckham, a family whose USP is based on family values, on togetherness and unity. Oh, how people like me have laughed at that. And this will absolutely have knocked the worth and value of Brand Beckham. And it is absolutely true. They have commodified their children. They've sold everything for the public gaze. As I say, even from when they were pregnant, every cough, spit and sneeze since, they've launched a million other families doing the same reprehensible thing. It's awful. I really hate that, the kind of branding of families on social media. And they, in part, were the forerunners of it. And what happens is childhood is lost to the parents' unwavering desire to be famous and rich and at the expense of their children. And unlike lesser known reality stars, which is essentially what David and Victoria Beckham are, but unlike other reality stars, the Beckhams did not need to do this for either money or fame. They had both in abundance already from his football career and from her pop star career. They did it for ego and power, and because they had been brought into a world where people no longer exist unless they are documented or observed. Everything has been for sale with the Beckhams: births, weddings, marriages. It just goes on. I mean, it just goes on. And so I always find it really funny that, again, the media have sold us this idea that Posh and Becks aren't like other celebrities. They're more sophisticated. Are they? Hell, they just managed to get the media on side for an assortment of reasons. And that's in part because of the people they've had behind them. But one of the things that has disturbed me about this is that, first of all, I believe Brooklyn Beckham. I believe he is. And the reaction that some people have that, oh, he's just this spoiled little brat Nepo child. As I say, he had no choice. He was brought up into it. And he certainly benefited hugely from the fame and wealth of his parents. No doubt about that. Okay, but he has absolutely shattered Brand Beckham. And it is a tale of our times. And all these PR agents have come out and said, this is like an existential crisis for the Beckhams, which tells you so much about the shallow world that they inhabit, that if something like this is an existential crisis, then what the hell have they been doing? And, because what they do is they use social media hugely to constantly promote their family, whether it's Cruz, their youngest son, and his band. But he himself still trades on the Spice Girls. I noticed that they had put on social media about Cruz doing a gig, and there was like a Spice Girls sticker in the corner. Please. That was 1997, but that tells you so much, because these kids aren't succeeding off their own bat. And that's one of the things that I really hate about the whole kind of Brand Beckham, is the nepotism attached to it. And also, can I just say, it's also possible that both Victoria Beckham and Nicola Peltz are the problem, because it's like people are saying it's Nicola, it's Victoria. Nobody's mentioning Brooklyn or David, but that also can be misogyny and sexism. But it is also possible that it is both Victoria and Nicola Peltz that are the problem, but that's not really of interest around here. Family relationships, as I say, are tricky business, but what they are actually experiencing is more common than many people realize. Famous families often have these kind of fallouts, but the difference is the Beckhams is all out in the public gaze. And again, I said they created this monster themselves. They use social media to increase their fortunes, and it will contribute to their downfall. What was it they say? You live by the gun, you end by it, right? And as I said, Brooklyn focused most of his anger at his mum, Victoria. And he did kind of, in passing, mention his siblings and his father. But almost exclusively it was focused at Victoria. And Brooklyn was once so devoted to his mum. He had 2 tattoos of her, but he's replaced his 2-word inkling of Mama's boy with a bouquet of flowers, which is apparently another tattoo to Nicola. He now has 70 tattoos. This is Brooklyn. He now has 70 tattoos on his body dedicated to his wife. Let's hope they don't divorce, right? But he follows after his father. His father is tattooed to hell and back. So it's always a great media front until this week. And there's a clip that they've shown online, and I'm sure many people have seen it. And it's actually of this image, but it is the clip of this image. And next to Brooklyn is actually Nicola. I think might have the picture of them. Maybe not. I'll show it later. And in the video clip, it's really embarrassing because, first of all, Victoria, and I've always said this, is one of the most unnatural and posed famous people that I actually know, right? She's so incredibly unnatural. She's so self-conscious. She's constantly self-conscious. She doesn't do anything without a great deal of forethought attached to it. And in this video clip, you see Brooklyn trying to bring his wife in to join the family because it's for the Netflix special on the Beckhams. And Victoria literally turns her back on her son and his wife. She's a sour-faced, nasty piece of work. It's horrible. And if she's prepared to do that in public, what the hell has she been doing in private? And what happens is Brooklyn reaches out a shot to encourage Nicola to join the group. Nicola joins the group. It looks like she's been crying. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But right from the beginning, it's important to understand that David and Victoria were a business deal. They were a business deal. He had multiple affairs, but she steered the ship straight ahead because money, fame, and power were more important to her than a husband who would be faithful and who would love her alone. And as I say, they worked extensively with pornographer Richard Desmond, who owned the Daily Express, OK Magazine, whole rash of publications. And the Spice Girls was absolutely image over talent. And Brooklyn is right. He's been branded. It has been performative. I don't doubt his parents love him, but they use their children as part of a selling experience. David and Victoria feel the need to capture their expressions of affection with their children. It's staged, it's scripted, and it's bloody unnatural. And so what's happened is Brooklyn is now married into a family that don't behave like the Beckhams. And it's really weird. It's like when I interview survivors of child abuse, sometimes they don't realize that they've been abused until they leave the family fold. Well, it's similar to Brooklyn. I'm not saying that he's been, sexually abused or anything like that, but I'm saying to a degree, all he knew was brand Beckham. And then suddenly he's put into another world of billionaires who don't need to be on social media 24/7. Not that the Beckhams ever did need to be. No, they didn't. And he's seen a different way of life. And there's a huge PR machine behind them, but sooner or later, the wheels started to slow down as grit was getting kicked up from the road. Lots of stories were starting to come out about them, but the media, their friends, largely kept a lid on it all. And no one, I can assure you, no one will expose the Beckhams in the wake-up way. Absolutely not. I understand what their son has said. They have managed their children rather than parented them. They have put branding above and beyond private and intimate relationships with their children. Harper, their only daughter, has been so institutionalized in this mad way of thinking that at a young age, she was already talking about creating a brand just like her mother. The Beckhams have always been for sale. And in today's investigation, I will show you how that has benefited them and harmed us. So that issue about the trademarking of their kids, well, that Brooklyn was talking about the pressure they were putting him under to sign away his rights. Right. Well, the trademark row was just one of many explosive claims that he made. And but the reality is that what happened is Victoria solely owns the trademark to Brooklyn Beckham's name, which is set to expire this year. And documents lodged with the UK's the office show them that went off momentarily, didn't it? That was quite odd, wasn't it? Showed that in December 2016, Victoria took out the trademark in her son's name. But when that expires in December of this year, Brooklyn will be free to renew it using his own legal team. Now, Victoria had apparently contacted Brooklyn and said, Daddy has a huge deal and you need to sign this. And what it was essentially that David Beckham had signed up with US brands firms, sold 55% of David Beckham Ventures and for 200 million, which actually meant that his and Victoria's commercial partners would have some right over their surname. So they had to kind of like wrestle it back from Brooklyn so it didn't interfere with David's 200 million deal. The trademark, actually, it should be said that Victoria owns a trademark on all of their children, which isn't actually as unusual or as egregious as it sounds. Famous people often trademark their children, and they do it for a form of protection generally, and that is to stop other people trademarking their children's names. But the thing is with the Beckhams, because they're so greedy, they're greedy and tight all at the same time. Loads of stories about how unbelievably tight they are, but they're extremely greedy, and the trademark of their children covers all manner of classes of goods, including cosmetics, aftershaves, clothes, shoes, sport, hats, toys, TV shows, and music. But Brooklyn said they were adamant on me signing before my wedding date because when the terms of the deal would be, because then the terms of the deal would be initiated. They wanted, the Beckhams needed to get their son to sign before he became Brooklyn Peltz Beckham, which is what he changed his name to. And but there was, so that essentially kicked it all off. But it says so much about them. And the thing about this whole story is it's not about wealth. It's actually not about wealth. It's not even about fame. It's not even about celebrity. But in part, when it comes to Brooklyn, it's about an adult child stepping out from a family brand into his own light. And because at this level of wealth, this isn't about money. And what happens is that, as I say, Brooklyn has immersed himself into a new family. And he's like, hold on a second. This mum doesn't get me to take pictures of my breakfast and for Instagram and put kisses across it, Victoria, which is what Victoria Beckham does. Every cough and spit of these kids is monetized by these people. They are horrible. They're mercenary as anything. And I think what's happened is Nicola, coming from an extremely wealthy family. I mean, she's the heiress of a billionaire. Right. And I think it changed the dynamic because actually Nicola Peltz's family are wealthier than the Beckhams. And, you know, some say that Nicola Peltz is a narc, but it's easy to blame a billionaire's daughter because Beckham's publicity machine has worked against them. And that is a reality. And as I say, the exploitation of their children has been since they were in the womb. And Brooklyn, it would appear, is the scapegoat, the family scapegoat, who is about to reveal family secrets. And I don't believe for a second that he's revealed the worst of what has taken place yet. And I think some of it's really problematic. I really do. This whole idea that everything is for sale. And you see people like Katie Price. Now, Katie Price, who Victoria once sang Who Let the Dogs Out to. Katie Price is very much kind of like on the lower end of a celebrity scale in terms of she's seen as somebody and portrayed by the British media. I don't like Katie Price at all, but she's portrayed by the British media as somebody kind of like who's a bit of a kind of like slapper kind of thing, for want of a better description, right? And Victoria has always been seen as somebody who's far superior to her. But the truth is they're bloody the same. They sell everything. There's really no difference between them, except people still cling on to this whole idea of Posh and Becks from Buckingham Palace, right? And I want to talk shortly also about Victoria's fashion empire and how they have sexualized their daughter. So before I get to that, I want to talk about the role of pornographer Richard Desmond, because it should not be underestimated. As I say, Richard Desmond, was owner of Express newspapers. I don't think he still is. But a media empire. And he would spend Friday nights with them in the early days planning what was going to be the next big scoop about them. So they were absolutely involved with their media image from the get-go. Absolutely, they were. And Richard Desmond even claims to have invented brand Beckham. When he addressed the Royal Television Society convention, he said, OK Magazine was losing £1 million a month, but I still had to pay out 7-figure sums for celebrity exclusives we needed. Then one day I made a telephone call and met up with a very nice young couple. Their names were Victoria Adams and David Beckham. They came to the office in Docklands, and I said, why don't we work together? And together we can help make you the new king and queen of Britain. And he laughed and she said, how? And Desmond said, we did a series of features culminating in their wedding issue, which had over 2 million sales. We were out of it. We were out of the problems we were in. We never looked back. And that was the birth of brand Beckham. So the birth of brand Beckham was that they were essentially going to be the celebrity king and queen of England. So on the surface, what is wrong with brand Beckham? Well, nepotism, obviously. And it promotes a lie about family togetherness. And as I say, the children have done very nicely. But according to Brooklyn, their affection comes from the affection that they get from their parents is a direct correlation of how much they show up for social media posts and media events. So it doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound great at all. Now, I did mention a little bit earlier about it known that Victoria had long been someone who'd behaved what was considered quite inappropriate around her children. So when Brooklyn came out and said she danced on him, a lot of people were not surprised. And in fact, it's so interesting because behind the scenes, and you can kind of see it in captions, in newspaper captions. But for a very, very long time, there was a running joke in newsrooms about Victoria Beckham, about how she was like horribly clingy towards Brooklyn. And because David had multiple affairs, she was kind of like constantly showing great affection towards Brooklyn. And some of it was a little bit icky, right? Some of it felt a little bit icky. It felt like she was posing with him as if he was her man, and people used to talk about it a lot in newsrooms. And the thing is, this whole idea that she was dancing inappropriately on him was also backed up by British DJ Fat Tony, who was a DJ at the wedding, at Brooklyn and Nicola's wedding. And his boyfriend said, originally, I was there and she did, he's telling the truth. And the comments since been deleted. And the boyfriend said, good on him for finally speaking out. But that is the truth. People have often laughed in newsrooms about, oh, here's Victoria wheeling out her boyfriend again. And it was her eldest son. And it was just really odd because it was all for the cameras. It was all for the cameras. So Brooklyn has been used in this way, and it's really uncomfortable. And other guests had accused Victoria of grinding and nuzzling son Brooklyn during the wedding dance. And again, I think that's highly possible because, well, I've seen what she has done to him for media images. So it's pretty gruesome stuff. And I once talked to a body language expert about it, and she said that Victoria is so tactile towards Brooklyn in images, and actually described it as clingy rituals, because David wasn't someone that she was, affectionate with publicly, and for various reasons, in part because he was having an affair, and the body language expert had said to me, the reason that she does this with her boys in public, and it is kind of gross, is to prove that they're a happy family. So again, Victoria is always about image, right? Always about image. And it is pretty gruesome. But I also should say that she wasn't alone in newsroom gossip, because newsroom gossip was also that David behaved inappropriately with their daughter Harper. And I think I put together some images of that as well. Let me just find it. And actually, again, it's been a running conversation for quite a long period of time about how David Beckham was constantly felt the need to always do big mouth kisses with Harper for the cameras. Now, some people say that's his daughter. It shouldn't be an issue. The problem might be in the minds of people who think it's an issue. Let me just show you. But he carried on even as she's become a teenager. And as you could see in one of these final pictures, she's trying to pull away from him, but they still want it for the cameras. And again, it was this whole thing of having to show for the cameras that they're a happy family, they're an affectionate family. And so when Brooklyn wrote that, there were some of us that went, yeah, we know she probably did grind on him. She probably did. Victoria probably did nuzzle her, her mouth into his neck and all that kind of stuff during his wedding. This is all possible. But as I say, this is not new that David and Victoria Beckham have been behaving really weird and odd and at times inappropriate with their children in front of cameras. It is nothing new at all. Nothing new at all. And despite the glossy veneer, they've always been a bit weird. That is the reality. That's the reality. And I know it's hard for people to understand and get their heads around about how the branding of their children and their family has taken place. And people, but as I say, Victoria has long been considered someone who's a bit weird. A bit weird. She's obviously very thin, extremely thin. And even though she talks about her eating disorder, she's been quite candid about it. But she talks about it in a historic context. Well, I doubt that very, very much. I don't think for a second that it's behind her. Not for a second. And this is a typical image from their home. And this is her ascending the staircase of their London home, and you can just see how thin she is. And that is not her natural body. I mean, it obviously is now, it's her body, but that's not her natural body type. She's got a little bit more meat to her generally. So I think she's still starving herself. And the thing is, you have to work at starving yourself, and you do that by eating a very minimal amount. Her body is starving. So that in itself, a terrible role model message, terrible role model message. And she's been doing that with her daughter. The sexualization of Harper, frankly, has turned my stomach. It truly has. And Victoria has a fashion line, which I'll talk about shortly, but highly unprofitable. But she has dressed her child up in the clothes. Victoria's big thing, excuse me, her dresses are like nighties. They're like slips. Now, bear in mind, her daughter Harper is only just now 13, but Victoria has been dressing Harper in really inappropriate dresses from a young age, from about 9. And these are cutaway dresses. These are dresses for, these are dresses that reveal her little cleavage and everything, but it's really inappropriate stuff. And it's the same kind of stuff that Beyonce has done with her daughter and Kim Kardashian has done with her daughter as well. So these are 3 horrible mothers who have sexualized their children. That's what they've done. And it's really inappropriate the way that this child has been dressed, really inappropriate. And Harper 7 is only just now 14. But she's been stepping out with the family from the get-go. Again, she's been branded right from the get-go. And as I say, she's constantly dressed up in Victoria's inappropriate outfits, because even though Victoria has, well, let me get to that actually, because after the Spice Girls, Victoria tried a solo career, a huge promotion, absolutely huge promotion, massive backing of the media, and they still couldn't make her a solo artist, partly because no, she couldn't sing, and no, she couldn't dance, and actually, no, she wasn't a great personality. You have to wonder why she would have become so famous given the very things that she was lacking. She had plastic surgery. She had fake breasts. She lied and said that she didn't. She never stops posing. She is, as I say, extremely, extremely fake. And the whole brand Beckham, it's been a lie through and through, from, as I say, the fake family togetherness to the so-called success of her fashion line, which has been routinely unprofitable. No wonder she has to dress her young daughter in her slips for family nights out. And at one stage, she accumulated over 66 million in debt, and that was by 2022. They've had years of losses. David Beckham has piled money into her fashion brand because this is where the rubber hits the road, as they say. The media can make it seem like you're everything, but when it comes down to people putting their hands in their pockets and buying what you're selling, it's a whole different story. It's like when you see people like media presenters like a Vanessa Feltz, for one example, right? She'd be on talk radio. Rupert Murdoch will have promoted her endlessly. She's been on the BBC, and so it appears that she's very, very successful and very popular. But when she sets up her own YouTube, she can barely get a few hundred hits, right? That's why they've taken her back onto mainstream media. That's a typical example, because when it comes down to actually showing people power, the Beckhams can't really do it, not in reality. And apart from anything else, Victoria's outfits and designs, not really hers, there are other people doing them, were and are grotesquely expensive. And who wants to be wearing slips? But what is successful for Victoria is her makeup brands. That's doing much better and actually is proving something of a success. She's like, her eyeliner has been very successful. But the truth is, pretty much everything about brand Beckham is an absolute sham. This is a media manipulated success story. That's what it is. It's as media manipulated a success story as you're likely to get on a basic level. Them selling us the idea that they are completely devoted and together is ridiculous for them and insulting to the rest of us. And David Beckham, of course, has been reported to have had numerous affairs when he was with Victoria and during marriage. Rebecca Lewis perhaps being the most famous. She was David Beckham's former PA. She claimed to have had an affair with him when he was married to Victoria. David has always denied the affair allegations and famously talked about it in the Beckham's Netflix show, I believe, Rebecca Lewis. There's too many stories about David Beckham's affairs. And there were multiple affairs that the media were not printing. Multiple. And again, because the media were up to their eyeballs and they were compromised by the whole brand Beckham thing. And in part because of this, because you cannot underestimate the role of publicists, managers, and strategists, right? The one thing that the Beckhams had was that they were decently good-looking couple, right? They're a decently good-looking couple, whichever way you look at it. And their children are decently good-looking as well. So very marketable. But the role of some of the people behind them, as I say, should not be underestimated. One man, for example, is Alan Edwards. Alan Edwards formed the outside organization. Just looked after everybody who was anybody, right? I spent an hour once with Alan Edwards in his office. He was having something of an existential crisis. I kid you not. It was the 90s. I was a music journalist and I'd been out to lunch with one of his senior publicists who looked after Jamiroquai and Beverly Knight, amongst other people. And we got back from lunch and I was tipsy as anything because I was drunk quite a lot of time as a music journalist and it was completely acceptable to be so. And I was known for being very cheeky. Right. And Alan spotted me in the office. He invited me into his private office and somehow, and I don't know how, I think I might have pulled some runes for him. I used to wander around with runes in a bag, pulling runes for people. I think I pulled some runes for him and I proceeded to advise him about his already fabulous business empire as a public relation. And he was behind the genesis of brand Beckham. Then there was Simon Fuller. Simon Fuller was also at one stage the Spice Girls magazine, and he was the Beckham's longtime business manager. And again, he continued to create brand Beckham as well. The Beckhams bought out Simon Fuller in 2019. But Simon Fuller did retain interest in some of Victoria's fashion empire. So now we've had some background, and I think I've given you a fair amount of background. Let's look at what is so egregious about brand Beckham. And despite David coming from a very working class background and claiming to be proudly so, Victoria's from a middle class background, although in the Netflix docs, she tried to pretend she was working class, but you're not working class if your dad is dropping you off at school in a Rolls Royce, right? That's just not the way it works. So, but in November 2025, David Beckham was knighted by King Charles III in recognition of his sporting career and his charity work. He now has the title of Sir David Beckham, and Victoria Beckham is Lady Beckham. I mean, it's just farcical. I don't believe in any titles anyway, because the point is you receive these titles and it shows that, one, you've already been an establishment arsewipe, and two, you will continue to maintain the status quo of the establishment. And that is exactly what has happened. Charles here is rewarding David Beckham for his ability to grovel, not for excellence. That is the reality. David Beckham has long desired to be a knight, and it was sabotaged a few years back. What happened was this flurry of controversial emails were leaked out that were said to have been sent by David Beckham to his PR and dating back to 2017. And David Beckham was reportedly given the all clear to receive a knighthood in the New Year's Honours List for 2022. But these emails leaked out showed that he was really angry about the honours committee, right? And he had called them the unappreciative C word. And he also allegedly claimed that he didn't care about being knighted, but he questioned why Catherine Jenkins, the opera singer, was awarded an OBE. He said, for what? Singing at the rugby and going to see the troops? And there were many stories about David Beckham, about how a lot of his charity was just because he wanted to create this veneer about himself. And what was so wrong about it was a lot of these stories were said in newsrooms, yet the newsrooms were putting out these stories about what incredible charitable work he was doing. Well, behind the scenes, they were saying, what an arsehole. He don't care about starving kids. He just wants to be a knight. So all of that hypocrisy, again, you won't get that around here at Wake Up. If it looks like an arsehole, if it smells like an arsehole, I'm calling it an arsehole. You know I will, right? And so a close friend of Beckham's, by the way, insisted that these emails had been doctored and that others had been written in the heat of the moment. Nonetheless, there were a series of controversies around him that made it impossible for Queenie, when she was still alive, to knight him. And one of them was also to do with his tax affairs. He was involved in a controversial film financing scheme, which HMRC deemed a tax avoidance vehicle rather than a legitimate investment. He was one of 1,000 investors. He faced a massive legally challenged tax bill after the scheme's artificial losses were disallowed. And this absolutely impacted his knighthood prospects. And the investors lost a court battle to overturn a 700 million plus tax bill. And he was absolutely brought up in this. And again, that doesn't set him apart too much from other famous rich people. A lot of the time people are rich is because they're greedy. And but the thing that is so annoying about David Beckham is that they set him up as a national treasure. Man is so uniquely English. This is what he's about. But he was involved in these schemes not to pay his due amount. That is the reality. Now, I should say that that scheme that he was involved in was classified as tax avoidance rather than tax evasion. Tax avoidance is legal, but it's still a bit dodgy. But tax evasion is illegal. Okay. So those were the problems. So he already had an OBE from 2003. But after the leaked emails, he was kind of like denied being made a knight. So then he did a series of things, of course, as he would. And I think this is also interesting. The Queen actually died in September 2022. And famously, David Beckham waited in line for 13 hours to see her body lying in state, right? Although you didn't get to see her body lying in state, you saw a coffin. Who knows whether she was in there or not. And he actually said, and it was all across the media, like, oh, isn't he amazing? Like, he's one of us, queuing for 13 hours. It was all for image. It was all for image. And also tabloids notoriously like to pit people against each other. So I don't know if you remember at the time, but there was a whole big thing about Holly and Phil from This Morning skipping the queue. And so the tabloids kind of triangulated them all. And it was like Holly and Phil are bad, David Beckham is good. And that's how it was all set up, when in fact they're all bad. But anyway, he commented at the time, after he waited in this queue, he said, anytime throughout my career, I've been asked to do anything regarding the royal family, Her Majesty, the princes, our king now, I have always been willing to do that. I grew up in a family that were royalists. Today, I think back to my grandparents, because if my grandparents were alive, they would have been here. So it's nice to be here to celebrate with everybody the life of Her Majesty and her legacy that she leaves. And again, I don't consider this man to be a working class hero, because a working class hero would not be propping up the British establishment that has routinely crapped on the working class from a very big height for a very long time. And Beckham has spent a lot of time around the royal family, huge amount of time. I even made a collage. So much time has he spent around the royal family. And he's met he met the late Queen several times, including at the opening of the 2002 Commonwealth Games and when she awarded him his OBE. Over the years, he's also been involved in the Queen's Young Leader Award, which was established in 2014. And it was also interesting. When he was at WEF this week, he opened up about his deep connection with the royal family. And so he was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, obviously a center for globalists, an annual event. And he was reflecting on his royal relationships. And he actually became visibly emotional as he discussed his involvement with the monarchy. He said, I always get emotional talking about anything that I do with our royal family. And he said that whenever the Prince of Wales sends me a message and says, I need you to do this or be there, it's always a yes for me. To be involved in that has always been a privilege. And he and William have worked together on numerous projects, including initiatives supporting mental health and emergency services. And Beckham has also shared his pride about being named an ambassador for King Charles Foundation, describing the king as an incredible man whose vision inspires him. Well, I bet it does, David, because Charles himself was not averse to an affair here and there. And but yeah, David Beckham is not that I wish to draw comparisons with who they are, but David Beckham arguably appears in more images with the royal family than Jimmy Savile did. And that's saying something. That is saying something. And so Beckham is absolutely a huge royalist. And it's just what's happened is he's transitioned from being a sports star to somebody who's in royal circles. And listen, don't get me wrong. I have no problem at all with people being ambitious and wanting to kind of rise above their quote unquote, their station in life or where they come from, but not to royalty. Royalty is the reason that we have a society which is several tiers in part. They contribute to that. Absolutely. You cannot have an equal society when you have a family who are treated as superior to the rest of us. And David and Victoria Beckham absolutely uphold this nonsense. That's what they do. And here's an image from, do you remember let me just find that. Here it is. Olympics 2012. I mean, the Olympics 2012, right? One of the most Illuminati inspired rituals in a long time. Well, of course, there was David Beckham. He presented the torch to the Queen. Of course he did. It's like there's no other sports people have existed in England except David Beckham. And the reality is very few footballers have ever been given a knighthood. But he wasn't given a knighthood for charity or for sporting, even though they had to give it that as an official title. He was given it for propping up the royal family and making them seem accessible and one of us. Now, you cannot mention David Beckham and the royal family without also mentioning ties to Freemasonry. It's impossible. The two go hand in hand. So this was an image, a rare image that made its way into the public domain. Let me just find that. And this was David Beckham with Prince William. Now, it should be noted, while Victoria has met the royal family, and obviously she's gone absolutely along with it, it's David Beckham who has wholeheartedly kind of immersed himself into promoting the royal family. Now, you might not be able to see it very clearly from this image, but on that helicopter is London Freemasons. That's what it is. And this, I don't know whether David Beckham is a Freemason, but I do know, first of all, that he's very sympathetic to the cause. He's connected to the cause. He's promoted Freemasonry. And according to the Freemasonry site, Esoteric Freemasons, he is absolutely a Freemason. And what it says is the former English footballer and current president of Inter Miami CF is one of the most famous Freemasons in the world. He was initiated into the fraternity in 2003 and has since been a vocal supporter of Freemasonry. And again, I don't know if this is true. The Grand Lodge, the HQ of UK Freemasons, will neither confirm or deny who is a Freemason. So they leave it to the person to choose to say so themselves. And Beckham has chosen not to say whether he is or not, but he definitely promotes Freemasonry and Freemasonic causes. This is the London Air. This was for the London Air Ambulance charity. And he appeared, as I say, with Prince William. It's the 1st of October, 2024. They celebrated the arrival of 2 new helicopters, and Jonathan Jenkins, CEO of London's Air Ambulance charity, talked about how the O'Mays, which is the lottery house seller people, and the London Freemasons were the 2 largest contributors to the appeal total. They raised over £60 million. The Freemasons are very, very rich. It's a very rich organization. Now, I don't doubt that he almost certainly is a Freemason. I don't doubt that at all. And I mean, I always think this is quite an interesting image. Of course, part of Freemasonry is in large part about imagery, right? We know that imagery, symbolisms, and you only have to go back, for example, to this checkered floor. Oops, it doesn't want me to share it. I wonder if I've got it in here. Let me just bear with me a little bit. But they, in their hallway, in their London property, big checkered floor, and actually some really weird imagery on the walls, which you can't fully see, but I can tell you about, and you can definitely see a little bit of it if it shows up. Let me just see if I can show you. Let's try this one. So you can see the checkered floor, and actually in their hallway, they have a blooded picture. And it's a piece of art by American painter and photographer Richard Prince. And it's said to be, it's rumored to be worth £3 million. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. And that appears to be the kind of standing price for it. It's from Richard Prince's nurses collection, and it features nurses in uniform. But this piece depicts a nurse covered in blood, right? And it's a nurse covered in blood next to their black and white checkered floor. And they showed it for Victoria's 50th birthday celebration. And so even though they are notoriously tight with their money, they're not generous, but they do spend quite a lot of money on art for both their London home and their Cotswold home. And so I think that there's a fair amount that kind of backs up the whole idea that he's probably a Freemason. But I think that it kind of goes against the Bram Beckham image to say that he's Freemasonic. But there is so much that they do as a couple, and him in particular as an individual, that you have to know he is part of a globalist agenda. I mean, 100%. If being at the World Economic Forum this week wasn't enough to convince people that this man is part of a globalist agenda, let me tell you about some of the things that he has been involved in. Okay, so one of the first things that made me realize this man is definitely involved in a globalist agenda, no doubt about it, was when Madeleine McCann was reported missing. He was one of the many celebrities, including like J.K. Rowling, who publicly appealed for help in finding missing Madeleine in 2007. And he recorded a televised message in Spain and to the UK to raise awareness and encourage anyone with information to come forward. He highlighted the global effort to find her. And you had people like Cristiano Ronaldo, who also made an appeal. And again, I think Ronaldo is kind of like, Ronaldo is clearly a very talented footballer. And let me just be clear here. I'm not a football fan, but when I talk to people, they say that David Beckham was a skilled footballer, right? Despite that kind of what happened with him at England. But people have said to me he was a skilled footballer. So I don't doubt that. I don't doubt he was. And certainly he was considered a global football icon. But a lot of that, because there were other footballers who were as good as him, if not better. And Ronaldo was probably one of them, but both of them have benefited greatly from global media campaigns and media blitz. But I think the slight difference in some respects was Ronaldo was born in Portugal and she went missing in Portugal. So Ronaldo made televised media broadcasts to Portugal. But anyway, I suppose Madeleine McCann comes from the UK. But that was one of the first times I was like, this guy is somebody who'll get involved in anything. And they all kind of jumped in, didn't they? It was Richard Branson, all of them. They all jumped in. They raised money. They gave money, all of them. So Beckham said about Madeleine McCann, we need to do everything possible to help police. If you have seen this little girl, please go to the local authorities or the police with any genuine information. Please help us. And it has to be said that David Beckham is very selective in which children he's prepared to help. Very selective indeed. But Madeleine McCann was one of them. And in fact, what I've discovered in the intervening years since 2007, and that is the kind of people who got very involved publicly in raising awareness about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are indeed globalist people. So take from that what you want. But it was at WEF this week. He was heckled at WEF, by the way, quite interesting. It was the 55th annual World Economic Forum. As I say, it was in Davos in Switzerland. We actually spoke live to Switzerland on Monday with a reporter. And what really irritated me about Beckham at WEF this week is he was honoured once again for his humanitarian work. And he's been a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for 20 years. And he received the Crystal Award for what they said was his ongoing commitment to improving the living conditions of young children. Now, that would be great if all children were the same in the eyes of David Beckham, but they're not. They're not. That is the reality. And the truth is that David Beckham and Victoria Beckham have been very selective indeed about which children deserve helping and which don't. So, first of all, David Beckham, even though he's been a UNICEF ambassador working with children and raising awareness for plights for children all around the world, it took him forever and a day to raise any awareness about what was happening to children in Gaza. Now, that might be to do with his Jewish background, right? That might be to do with it, or it might be that he's compromised like so many other people are. And in fact, it took other people who were raising awareness to do with Gaza to get David Beckham to do anything. And he eventually, finally, like a year and a half after what had happened on October the 7th, David Beckham finally shared a post to do with UNICEF. And he just failed all the way down the line. But they didn't fail him and Victoria when it came to the Ukraine. Now, when it came to the Ukraine, they gave massive support. Ukraine, of course, is a globalist project. We know that, right? And he's had a lot of backlash about his silence around Gaza, okay? He just simply refused to call out Israel. But when it came to the Ukraine, he handed over control of his Instagram account to a Ukrainian doctor. in March 2022. And that was, to talk about Russia and the impact that the war was having on pregnant women and children. And in the same month, him and his wife Victoria donated 1 million to a UNICEF appeal to support Ukrainian children. But David, who was a Qatar 2022 World Cup ambassador, has been accused of being less explicit regarding where he stands when it comes to the plight of the Palestinian people. I think it's a combination of things that are going on, but I'm in no doubt whatsoever that he is highly, highly compromised. But the idea that he would receive a humanitarian award when he had to be pushed and shoved just to share a sodding post from UNICEF about children starving in Gaza really says it all, right? I think that says so much. And I think he's a really disingenuous individual. I think he'll say whatever needs to be said in order to be seen with this kind of halo around him. But he also talked, ironically, this week about the power of social media. Well, the power of social media is where they've exploited their children and where his son has decided to exact revenge on his parents. And David was talking about, social media is both good and bad for children. He said what kids can access this day, it can be dangerous, but what I've found personally, especially with my kids as well, I use it for the right reasons. The right reasons is flogging your sodding brand. I really do struggle with David Beckham. I find him such a insincere and untrustworthy individual, and he's definitely not someone who should be recognized for humanitarian efforts because they are very selective efforts. And when he was kind of asked, he said, I've tried to do the same with my children to educate them about social media. And he talked about how children make mistakes. They're allowed to make mistakes. This is how they learn. That's what I tried to teach my kids. He didn't directly address the fact that his son had just lobbed this, just detonated this, hand. I don't even know what I'm saying here, but the point is he didn't address the fact that his son had just detonated their media image. That's what I was trying to say. And he was like all posing for selfies and everything like that. But I think it's really wrong that he received the humanitarian award. Really wrong indeed, because he's highly compromised and not all children are equal in the eyes of David Beckham. And again, he goes around the world talking about what a humanitarian he is towards children, but his own children, at least the oldest one, is complaining and saying, I've been branded. I've been used. They only show love to me if I show up for an event or on a social media post. So it's really hypocritical. And it's everything that anybody should come to expect about Brand Beckham. And in part, why I really dislike it is because it's so fake. It's so false, really false. And of course, massive pusher of vaccinations. I mean, massive. He's been doing it for a very, very long time. I don't know if I've got a video where he's pushing. Let me just see if I actually have got the video of him pushing vaccinations. Maybe I haven't, but you don't need to see it to know that it's a real thing, because many of my viewers know about it. So he's actively promoted vaccines in his capacity as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. And he had the 2021 Global Vaccine Drive, in which he led a global vaccination campaign for UNICEF to encourage parents to vaccinate their children against diseases like diphtheria, measles, and polio. And his big message is, direct quote from him, vaccines work, saving millions of lives every year. I have learned through my work with UNICEF just how important they are for the health of our loved ones. And then, of course, big COVID-19 pusher, massively so. And he urged people to get vaccinated to help communities return to normal and to ensure children did not miss routine immunizations. That was a video I was going to play. So actually, he's in this video, and what he's talking about is he's saying, we can be together again with our families. I hated that it was so much coercion involved, and it was partly achievable because you had big brand names like David Beckham who were pushing this whole idea that we can be together again as a family, but first we must all get vaccinated. Well, since then, And many of us knew then. I never promoted this, never, ever, ever, because I knew enough to see that mRNA was experimental. But you see, it doesn't matter to people like David Beckham, although I'm not entirely convinced that his family would all be vaccinated, because oftentimes these people aren't, right? But yeah, he pushed this whole coercive tactic that if you get vaccinated, you can be reunited with your families again. I mean, that on its own should have people just, loathing him, because obviously now there's the information that's now coming out. As I say, many of us already suspected it or knew there was something wrong. But either way, even if people didn't completely know what was happening in 2021 when they did that rollout, we knew enough to know it was experimental. We knew that. And yet he was there saying, you've got to have this. Then you can be reunited with your loved ones. It was horrible. It was a manipulative tactic. And he was front and center. No wonder he got a knighthood eventually. He served the establishment very well. He's made the establishment look like it's open to everybody. Why, here he is. He's David Beckham. He's a East End lad. Not very bright, but he could kick a football. And look how far he's come. That's the story that they sell. What they don't tell you is what you've got to be prepared to do in order to be able to get that knighthood. He used his social media to advocate for vaccines on a constant basis, and to pressurize people into getting immunized. And he's supported all manner of initiatives to do with vaccinations. And I bet you not once, not ever, has he ever really looked into vaccinations, because he doesn't need to. Why does he need to? He wants to be seen as somebody who's saving the world. He has a kind of God complex, no doubt about it. I don't know if anybody ever saw it, but there was this really quite funny thing that happened. James Corden used to, horrible, another individual, but a good friend of David Beckham. James Corden used to do this American show, and he used to do kind of stunts where he would prank famous people. And what they did was they told David Beckham they were going to create a life-size statue of David Beckham out of gold. Well, he loved the sound of that. And he was there at the grand unveiling. So honestly, I mean, I'm not that it would ever happen, but if somebody said to me, we're going to create a giant life-size statue, well, it was bigger than life-size, it was huge. We're going to create a giant statue of you made of gold. I'd be like, are you kidding? Don't do that kind of shite. But David Beckham, because he's probably partly a psychopath, but because he's absolutely got a God complex, he ran towards it with both hands. Yes, please do make a huge gold image of me. Anyway, when they unveiled it, it was this really kind of ugly David Beckham version. And he was appalled. You could see he was deeply, deeply unhappy. And then they had to tell him it was a prank. But because he's extremely vain, Victoria notoriously called him golden balls, right? But the pair of them together, they're really not much beyond being quite pretty faces. They're not. But where they've been useful is they've been very malleable. And that is their lust for fame, their lust for wealth, their lust for power is so great that both of them, in particular David, have been prepared to do all manner of outrageous global agendas in order to be in favor with the establishment. And I do think that expression, sold their souls to the devil, absolutely applies to David and Victoria Beckham. And now, of course, their children, who they have who they've pulled in to the whole empire. But obviously, Brooklyn has decided he's going his own way. So these people are absolutely purveyors of a globalist agenda. Of course, he was at WEF this week. Of course, he received a humanitarian award, because the thing is, those humanitarian awards are given for compliance. And they're given for you upholding the agenda. They are not given for your actual work in the field. There is no way, because if they were, he would not be considered humanitarian for him turning his back for a very long time on the plight of the Gazan children. And that is what he did. And as I say, I'm not entirely sure why he did that, but he did it. That's provable. John didn't even know they had a daughter. This is the entire celebrity world, like it's Eurovision. They're all contrived. The sons that look like her aren't attractive either. Now, see, I do think they are an attractive family. They're attractive enough. They are attractive enough. Yes, Nikki, it was a gold statue, but we are talking massive. It was a massive statue. But can you imagine what kind of person would love the idea of that, right? Oof. You are welcome, Michelle. Michelle says, keep hitting the like button for Sonia speaking the truth. There are plenty of people more deserved than him, says Marco. Give me Matt Tissier any day, says Gary. And so say all of us. Now, actually, that is a brilliant comparison right there. Perfect comparison. Matt Tissier is actually out there doing something for humanity. What happened to him? He lost his long-term gig at Sky, didn't he? Then they tried to stop him doing events. He's essentially been cancelled because he is anti-globalist agenda. Matt Tissier highlighted problems with lockdown, with C-19, with the jabs, everything that David Beckham didn't do. Matt Tissier, in my opinion, is far more of a national treasure than David Beckham will ever be. David Beckham works for them, not for us. And so does his wife, Victoria. And so actually what we're looking at here right in front of you is a sham. The whole thing is a sham. They are not a united, loving married couple. The reality is they spend the vast majority of the time apart. They are in different corners of the world, but they come together for these media events like this image, which is from their Netflix documentary, and to make it look like they are one of us. They're a united family. And as we've seen this week, it's all leaking out. And thank goodness for that, because I'm so sick and tired of people like them being hoisted to great heights and treated as if they are the second coming, when in fact they are very little more than a media invention. And when you start to look behind the scenes, you realize that these are people who have been selling us a lie for a very long time. They're a terrible influence on society. Victoria is a terrible influence with her thinness and her sexualizing of her child and her lack of actual ability. Victoria is almost completely devoid of talent other than the ability to be ruthlessly ambitious. And the same with David. David, as I say, many people considered him to be a talented sports star, and that's cool. But aside from that, what is he? Have you heard those two speak? They are not bright. They're not bright, which makes them dangerous, because when you are that ambitious and ruthlessly so, that you want to be so famous, you want to be so rich, you want to have so much power, but you're not actually hugely intelligent. That means that you allow other people to fill up what you're about. Okay. And that's what's happened. Other people have filled up what the Beckhams are really about, while they are all the time creating this whole idea that they are happy, united, and loyal, and a loyal family. That's what's been sold to us. They've been packaged, they've been protected, they've been presented to make the rest of us believe that they are the perfect family and wonder what went wrong with us, right? And on those lies, they have sold us so many dangerous agendas, and they are continuing to sell dangerous agendas. And that includes, as I say, the lie that Madeleine McCann was abducted. Where is David Beckham now saying, well, I'm a national treasure, and no, I'm not even going to attempt to do an impersonation of him. But if you've heard him, he's not got the voice that anybody imagined him to have. Okay, but where is David Beckham now saying, why are we spending £14 million on an investigation? What about the British people? Well, he wouldn't do that, obviously. And obviously then there are other things that he's done, as we've seen, upholding of the British establishment, including royalty. Very key when it comes to royalty and what he's been prepared to do, because he has absolutely made them seem approachable, like they're one of us. And that is a lie. They're not one of us, no more than the Beckhams are one of us. So they've upheld the British establishment, including royalty. They promoted experimental jabs. And these people right here on your screen, because their children don't know any better. This is how they've been raised. This is a picture of naked ambition. This is actually what it looks like. This is a collection of people who are prepared to do whatever it takes to be famous. And let me be clear, when they put their daughter in inappropriate outfits, don't you think they know it's going to be discussed by people. Of course they do. So they have been prepared to put their daughter, their young daughter, in outfits that reveal her little young cleavage that's cut away in, and they know that her image is going to be poured over all around the world. They know that, but they don't care because it's not about protecting their children. These are not good parents. I don't care what anybody says, because surely the thing about parents is you should be protecting your children. You shouldn't be selling their every cough and spit for a price. And that's what they've done. And the problems with the Beckhams is about so much more than celebrity gossip. And I just think it's so interesting this week. It's all been a distraction. That's the reality. It's like the true story of the Beckhams is that we have a compromised media who have lied to us for decades about who they are and what they're really about. And they are a compromised family. I mean, that's the true story. They are essentially the UK's useful idiots for 3 decades. They've contributed to much that is wrong with our society, whether that is nepotism, whether that is sexualization of children, whether that is mediocrity over talent, the commodification of their children, style over substance, agendas that have enslaved us as people. And you know what? These two apparent simpletons have been so dangerous because they have been driven by such degrees of ambition that they have been prepared to do, as I say, a great deal of what is wrong in this world. These are not great examples of people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, which is kind of like the David Beckham story, right? Her fashion line is a flop. Her media image made her an icon, but she's not a real one. And knighthood delayed because of tax affairs and because David Beckham was using charity to give himself a halo shine, and it was all caught out. And I loathe so much what they represent, and I've loathed it for a very long time. And I'm very glad that this week has happened. I'm sorry for Brooklyn, because when you escape a controlling environment like that, and that's not to say that his new family, the Pelts, aren't going to manipulate him and exploit him, but it might be on different terms now because at least he's an adult. But these children, the Beckham children, they don't know any different. So I kind of allow them to a certain degree, but that doesn't mean they haven't benefited greatly. They really have. Brooklyn, for one example, has in a very short period of time been a photographer with his own photography book, and it was rubbish, absolutely awful. Been a chef, I think been a designer, all these things that have just been handed to him that he didn't excel at. I think he's sticking with the chef thing. But the truth is at one stage, Brooklyn was like caught by this YouTuber, and he was in a $1 million sports car. And when the YouTuber said to him, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a chef." But what chef has a $1 million sports car? You got it because you're part of Brand Beckham. And for a longest period of time, Brooklyn was prepared to go along with it. Now, it could just be that he's now entered into a family because they're far richer than the Beckhams. He considered them to have more power. Maybe the Beckhams, because they are so materialistic and so greedy. Maybe their children are. Maybe their children aren't true and genuine with affection either, because if you've been raised in such a narcissistic environment, it'll be very difficult to. So I just wanted to say all that, really. I know that the Beckham story is so much more than a celebrity story, but nobody talks about, like the Daily Mail and whomever and TV, it's everywhere, right? Everywhere. But it's only about the relationship between the Beckhams and their son, Brooklyn, and his wife. Whereas I think far more interesting things are what they've actually stood for a long period of time, and how they've been able to con people, and how they have been part of some kind of, giant scam against the rest of us. They're talking groomed by their parents. So sick. You don't become famous if you haven't sold your soul, said King. And I do think there is a degree of that. I think there are degrees of fame, King, I have to say. And I think that there's kind of like, the social media fame, and obviously that doesn't involve it. But to get to the level of fame that the Beckhams have, you do, to a degree, have to be prepared to put any morals to one side. Now, I'm not convinced either of them had any great morals from the get-go. as I say, my first encounter with Victoria was where they were asking me to lie that she wasn't smoking, right? Her and the other girls. And they kind of like, Spice Girls was built on a lie. It was all about girl power. Yeah, it was run by men, right? Men were running Spice Girls. And obviously they lied about the idea for their image and their characters, which came from me. And that was at the request of the record company. And they said that it'd come back much more organically when they were at a photo shoot. And Top of the Pop said, oh, look, we should call them this and that. That isn't. So the success of Victoria alone is based on a lie. It's based on a lie. She's not talented, but she was very, very good at marketing herself. So clearly, like the Kardashians, and actually, I think that the Kardashians, as deplorable as they are, I think they are actually more intelligent than David and Victoria Beckham. And I think what makes David and Victoria Beckham precisely dangerous is they are not very intelligent. But when you're not very intelligent, and then that is coupled with the hankering for fame and success that they have, it is a lethal combination, and it has been working against us, the people. That is the reality. It's been working against us, the people. Let's look at some of your comments then. Essa says, bad publicity is still publicity. Well, to a certain degree. Now, I get that. And that is something that people say often. It's not good. It's not good publicity for them this week, because the brand Beckham is based on a unified family where they're all together, and David kisses his daughter, inappropriately, and Victoria hugs her son inappropriately, all for the public gaze, right? It's based on that. So this is not good publicity for them. So I'm sure people will say, oh no, they're all in it together. It doesn't make sense. I understand how the media works. I worked in it for so long. It doesn't make sense that they would be all in this together to raise their profiles, because this does not help brand Beckham. It 100% does not help brand Beckham. And they know it. They will have lost money this week, because what happens is a lot of their money is made from sponsorships. Well, people aren't necessarily going to want to sponsor them when their son is saying that the mother was dancing inappropriately at a wedding and was dancing on him and kind of like nuzzling him and grinding and whatever is what's coming out. People aren't going to want that, because they've had this image of her being very sophisticated. And actually, Victoria is a real drunk when she gets going. I mean, I've seen her, and I know that's the truth as well. And there's nothing dissimilar in that respect to a million people up and down the land, right? Have a little drink, get a little bit leery and everything, except their image is based on them being quite sophisticated and stylish. So I think that their brand will take a hit this week. And it's about time. I think it's about time. So there you go. That is what I wanted to say. No, Martina, I don't believe that they will divorce. I don't think that they have a marriage as such. But again, I don't necessarily want to speculate about their relationship, because I don't know. People don't know what goes on in a relationship. What I do know is they don't spend much time together. And that is what marketeers say is the foundation of the success of their marriage, is because they don't spend much time together. Yes, Mr. Mensa, I should actually get some royalties, but they completely cut me out of the image. Even Wikipedia doesn't mention it. But as I say, this book does very clearly sets out my role. So there you go. And I'm a sophisticated drunk, to be honest, said Ian. Flo said she'll be having a lettuce lunch. And that's the thing. People have come to associate Victoria with being pin thin, because she is pin thin. And that is not a good look. And that has become a beauty standard. So again, a terrible role model. These people are terrible role models. Thank you, John. I have had an interesting life. I think so. So thank you for being here. Peggy, what explains everything? But thank you for being here. I really appreciate it, wherever you're watching us. And I will be back on Monday as per. Thank you always to the wonderful people who support me around here, everybody who contributes to Wake Up. It really means the world to me and enables me to show up here twice a week on Mondays and Fridays. Monday, of course, is our news show, and Friday is our investigation show. And Monday, as I say, I'll be back. And it is the image of the butterfly. What's that? You're welcome, Jacqueline. You're welcome, Sonia. You're welcome, Nikki. Terrible role models is the agenda, says MK Iggy. And that the thing about agendas, Iggy, and especially globalist agendas, is they can use individuals for numerous agendas. I mean, we've seen that, haven't we? Like, and they can use situations for numerous agendas. Look how many agendas they use C19 for, right? They used it to usher in new laws. They've definitely to continue furthering us into a cashless society, mRNA jabs, the lockstep of people. They had, remember, the take away our sovereignty so that it was all decided by the WHO. So many agendas were attached to C19. Well, the same is with people. They're exactly the same. But I think the fact that we know them to be absolutely upholding the British establishment, that in its own right should be enough. But then there's all this other stuff that they tack on the back of it. So no, down for Bram Beckham. And I'm so glad to finally see it being exposed. Yes, indeed I am. So have a wonderful, thank you, Captain Flint. Soldier needs a shower after all this dirty celebrity talk. Michelle says, hit that frigging like button, folks. Thank you. I appreciate you very much. And thank you for being here. And I will see you on Monday. Take excellent care of yourself. Lots of love, peeps. See you Monday.